Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for being here. I apologize for the cold room. There's a problem with the air conditioning. They called the repair people, but they have not come to do anything yet. So please bear with us. We're very sorry. Again, I say thank you very much for being with us for this, our very special program. My name is Robbie Winnick. I am one of the co-presidents of the Iowa Jewish Historical Society. Before I begin, I also want to thank our gold sponsors, Marilyn and Lou Hurwitz, our silver sponsors, Grinnell College, Tom Press, and Donna Paulson, with helping us to be able to put on this program. Thank you very much. For many of you, this is probably the first time you've heard about the Iowa Jewish Historical Society, wondering what we are and what we do. Our organization was founded in 1996 as part of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines. The Historical Society is an award-winning organization. Our collection, exhibits, programs, and publications are the keys to preserving and understanding the history and contributions that the Jewish people of Iowa have made to the cultural and economic growth and development of Iowa, also of our country and the world. As such, the Iowa Jewish Historical Society fulfills a unique role that we are the only organization in Iowa that has this as their central mission. Since the 1830s, Jewish people have made their homes in more than 100 cities in Iowa. They have run businesses, successful businesses mostly, hopefully, raising families and leaving their mark on Iowa history. Our museum is located in Waukee. It features educational exhibits, programs, special events that focus on all aspects of Jewish life and history in Iowa and are designed to deepen understanding of our history, our culture for both Jewish and non-Jewish people. Understanding the history and contributions of all Iowa's cultures, including the Jewish people, lays the groundwork for strong, resilient communities, strengthens connections and commitment to each other, builds understanding of multiple perspectives, and helps craft better solutions for today's challenges. This is what makes today so special. We have a unique opportunity to hear from one of the last living survivors from Schindler's List. Celina Karp-Binyaz tells her personal story, a story of a young schoolgirl whose childhood was stolen from her by a madman, but who built a happy and productive life in America. Celina frequently says that Oscar and Emily Schindler gave her a second chance of life, and Steven Spielberg gave her a voice. It is truly an honor and a privilege to hear that voice today. But for one moment, I want to tell you of a personal story. I picked up Celina at the airport yesterday, and as we were about to leave, the crew and the pilots of the plane came off and immediately came right over to Celina. They had heard about her story, why she was coming to Des Moines, and what she was here for. They thanked her for being on their plane, and they took pictures of her. The only thing they forgot was your autograph. Anyway, I really thought I was in the presence of royalty. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our celebrity. Celina Carp Binyaz.
Thank you, Robbie. Can you hear me? Because my teeth are chattering. First of all, good afternoon. I am delighted to be back in Des Moines. Des Moines is the city that welcomed my family right after the Second World War, gave my parents 50 years of wonderful life here, happy and productive, and helped me at the age of 16 when I came here to move forward with a great many helps and truly great. So I feel like I'm coming back home. So it's been a great experience for me to be asked to come back. Now, first of all, I am a Holocaust survivor, and every survival is unique. My survival is unique because I was fortunate enough to be on Schindler's List. Other people were all different types of survivals, either hidden someplace or under a bunker or something like that. But before I even continue, I need to make tribute to the people who did not survive. And those are the 11 million people that the Nazis exterminated. 6 million were Jews, but 5 million were other kinds of people. There were the Jehovah's Witnesses, there were the political prisoners, there were the people of clergy, Catholic, Protestant, and others. They were the Roma, the Gypsies. There were all those people that did not fit the Aryan type. So I am a survivor, but I often think of the people who did not make it. So my survival and second chance on life came because whoops, does that work? Yeah, it does. It came on May 9th, really 1945, because war was over in Europe. The war ended on the 7th and 8th in different parts of the European continent. And we were not really liberated till the 9th. And I'll tell you the reason for it a little later. Mr. Schindler and Mrs. Schindler were so good to us at that point, that we felt, they saved our lives, that we felt, the 1,100 people at the factory, that we needed to help them save their lives too. Mr. Schindler called us all down onto the factory floor to say goodbye to us. He actually cried, saying he wished he could have saved even more people, but he couldn't. He spent the entire fortune that he made during the war by bribing various officials to collect his 1,100 people. So he said goodbye to us. Some of the men actually contributed gold from their teeth, and we had a goldsmith among us, and he made a ring for Mr. Schindler. And the ring said, in Hebrew, inside, "He who saves one saves the world." And Mr. Schindler wore it as he left us. Now, what else we did? It was so important for him that the people that he saved, he particularly wanted to save families, because he believed that when you save a family, you are ensuring future generations. So the factory that was a munitions factory that he took over was at one time a cloth factory. So he made sure that every family received 2 bolts of cloth and 5 pairs of scissors so that we could barter these, because we had no money at all. So he figured, okay, after the war, people might want to have cloth and other things like that. We bought it the 4 pairs of scissors, but 1 pair of scissors is right there on the table, and you can take a look at it. That came from the concentration camp. So it's kind of unique, and I've kept it all these years. Whoops, did I turn it off? Wow. Oh, okay. Liberation from camp. We were waiting till the 9th of May, rather than right away on the 7th or 8th, because there was a former Yalta agreement that said that the Americans were going to liberate Germany, but the Russians were going to liberate Czechoslovakia. And we had to wait for the Russian soldiers to move up to the point where we were for them to liberate us. So the Russian army, it was an interesting experience. They were, one Russian came on a horse, but the rest of the Russians were kind of mixed army. There were men, women, young men, bedraggled. You wouldn't have thought that was an army. You would have thought that they were just hobos of some sort. But we were very glad to see them, believe me. Okay. I'm not doing this right, am I? Anyway, so after we were liberated, we just started going on our journey back to Krakow. It took us about 11 days to get there. We had the protection of the Czech government. They were very good to us. We received a certificate from the government, and I have a copy of it there, and I also have a copy on the PowerPoint, asking the Czech people to be very good to us, to supply us with food and any kind of help they could give us on our way. Because we were actually hitchhiking and hitching rides. There was no transportation. All the bridges were blown away. So it took us actually 11 days to make it back to Krakow. I told you about these documents. We looked and we were called Katsetniks because we had shorn hair and bedraggled clothing, striped pajamas wooden shoes, and very emaciated. I was 13 years old and the youngest female on the Schindler's List, and I only weighed 35 kilos, which is a little over 70 some odd pounds, So everybody who saw us would know that we were what we were saying. Now, this is the document that the Czech government issued to us and said, please, in Czech, it asked the Czech people to please help us out because we were prisoners of a concentration camp. This also testifies to the fact that we were prisoners of a concentration camp, and, which can't be denied by some other people. We ended up in Krakow after about 11 days of walking and traversing Czechoslovakia. We had 2 priorities. One priority was to find our family, and to do that, we notified the Red Cross to let the people on the outside, because my parents had family living both in Palestine and in the United States, to let them know that we had survived. The next group was to notify the Jewish Survivors Organization because to find out if any of our family in Europe has survived. And the second priority was my education. I had only had 2 years of elementary school because when the Germans invaded Poland in September of 1939, I had just finished 2nd grade. Schools were closed right away. They never opened. They opened finally for non-Jews, but they never opened for Jews. So that was the end of my education. I knew how to read, but I have not had a pencil in my hand in all these years. There were serious gaps. I was now turning 14, I was embarrassed, naturally, for not knowing anything. And when you are denied something, you tend to crave it very much. So I craved trying to learn all kinds of things. Besides, my head was absolutely empty. There was nothing there. So it was kind of easy to retain everything. Anyway, that's when we used one of our barters. We hired a tutor, and using some of the cloth, some of the scissors, we were able to get lodging in Krakow, get some food, and this tutor taught me enough Polish history, everything that I needed to catch up to be able to take the exams to enter middle school or high school. So I studied a lot. I took the entrance. It was fortunate that it was the summer, so that I had enough time from May through September to cover quite a bit. I took the entrance exams. In Poland, all the schools were segregated. There was the school for girls and school for boys. I made it into the school for girls. There were only 2 Jewish kids accepted that fall. And I was absolutely thrilled. It was wonderful for the first time to be amongst peers, people that were just like me, and learning. It was great. Unfortunately, it did not last, because by the time September came, there was the Jewish holidays occur. The Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah or New Year occur usually around September, and there was another pogrom or insurrection against Jews in the eastern part of Poland. My parents decided that this virulent anti-Semitism right after the war was not something that they wanted to experience again, and they decided, by that time we've also heard that the people in my father's brother in Palestine and my father's brother in Des Moines knew that we had survived and were willing to send affidavits for us to join them. So my parents decided that we weren't going to stay in Poland. We were going to go and find our luck in another country. We decided to leave Poland. Unfortunately, the borders in end of September, beginning of October, the borders of Poland next to Czechoslovakia or next to Germany were closed, because that's the way it was. So again, we had to smuggle. We smuggled out of Poland in a Russian truck. Bribed again. I don't remember how we were bribing it, because I was too interested in just being me at that point. So we left in this Russian truck at night, ended up in Bratislava, which is the Slovakian capital. And from Bratislava, after 2 weeks of traversing Czechoslovakia, we ended up in Prague. And from Prague, after 2 weeks, we had a night crossing into Germany. Again, smuggling over the border. We ended up in the American zone, and at first we ended up in a displaced persons camp, so, but my mother, always forward-looking and very resilient, said she no longer wanted to live in a camp, and I thank her for that a lot. So my parents decided to, after 2 weeks in that camp, my parents decided to move into a small town in Germany and live on ration cards, named Mindelheim, the name of and we were going to live on ration cards and packages from the United Nations Relief Organization. And those packages were wonderful, because inside were such things as soap, coffee, chocolate bars, which we were able to then barter for my lessons in Germany, So that was great. So the problem again was that now we were living in this small town in Germany. I had just done all the exams in Polish. I couldn't go to a German school because I didn't know enough German, and I certainly didn't know enough subjects in that, the topic. So I had to learn German, and because we've heard from my uncle in Des Moines that he was processing affidavits for us, and we were going to go to the United States, I also needed to learn English. There was a convent in the town. It's a semi-cloistered convent that meant that the nuns never left it, but the children that came in there for education came in and out. In that convent, there was a 90-year-old retired nun. She entered the convent at the age of 16 and never left. She had no idea of Hitler's propaganda or anything like that. She was unbelievable in that sense that we arranged for her to tutor me in English and in German, and the way she did that is by pointing to items and naming them in the different languages, and I would write that down. She totally accepted me. She was so unique. She had a gentle manner because she didn't know she was supposed to hate me in any way. She just did things that a 14-year-old girl needed. It was her manner and her wonderful acceptance, total acceptance of me. She didn't think of me as being a Jew. She just thought of me as a 14-year-old girl that she was teaching. Slowly, over the 2 years that I was with her, she was able to work her magic, really, because I found the realization, also by living in that small German town, I'm forever grateful to my parents for choosing that, because it showed to me that not all Germans were ogres. There were some awfully nice people. It's the political situation, not the human beings. And she also worked with me by talking to me, and by her gentle manner and her life was able to help me work through my bitterness and anger, and showed me that hatred is incredibly corrosive, because all you do is hurt yourself. The person you're hating doesn't know that you're hating them. And it helped me then go on forward into life. I always talk about her that she was sort of my salvation. Okay. We get our affidavits after 2 years, and we have to go to Munich to pick him up at the United States consulate. And so we go to Munich. At this point, I'm almost 16. I'm 15, 9 months or something like that. Okay. And who do we meet on the street in Munich but Oskar Schindler? It was just an unbelievable experience. He knew my parents very well because they worked for him and for his friend Madrich. And when he found out that we were going to the United States, he was absolutely thrilled, because he felt that he had saved a family, and that was the good that he did. Oskar Schindler was not accepted after the war in Europe at all, particularly in Germany. He was hounded. For a while, he lived in Argentina with his wife, and there it was pretty good. They gave him a farm because he was going to raise not minks, but something else, some sort of a little furry animal, but that didn't work out for him. Nothing seemed to work out for him. The only place that he was happy was in Israel, because a lot of the people that he saved settled in Israel, and whenever he came there, they feted him, they loved him, he loved that too. And as a matter of fact, this is a very interesting little trivial question or a trivial story. If you ever asked, what Nazi is buried in Israel, it is Oskar Schindler. He's buried in Israel. So sometimes if you're playing Trivial Pursuit, that might come in handy. We go to the ship to the United States, and that takes 11 days on the sea, and it is a troop ship. They hadn't been decommissioned as yet. I turned 16 the day I stepped on the ship, so that is really the beginning of my new life. And I'm thrilled. We take 11 days. It was a rough passage. The troop ship had 2 cabins, because this was for soldiers. So one cabin was for men and one cabin was for women, and it was these hammocks that the soldiers slid into. There were 5 hammocks. Of course, I had no difficulty with that, but some of the other women did. And everybody was seasick, but I loved everybody's ice cream that I got, so that was good. All right, we come to Des Moines, wonderful city, totally accepting. My uncle came with his car and drove us from New York to Des Moines, which gave me a chance to see parts of the United States, and how vast it was. We really, in Europe, didn't know where is Des Moines, So fortunately, I had brought all my books and notebooks and things that I had studied and presented them to North High School to see where I could fit in September. We came in June, so there was a whole summer ahead, And North High School was very good. They looked at it and they said, okay, you're ready to go to 12th grade. So all of a sudden, from 2nd grade, I am in 12th grade. But in between, I've done all the work on my own with tutors. But they said I had to have a course in American history and American literature. So for American history, I went that summer to East High School. So I experienced 2 high schools already in Des Moines. In September, I joined the North High School. It was an incredible year for me. I loved every minute of it, loved the kids, loved the education, loved the teachers, particularly one teacher, though, that some of you North High people might remember, Mr. Laurie, who taught civics, and he showed me the way to become an American citizen and what it meant to be an American by teaching me the basics of American civic education, teaching about the laws, the voting, etc. The girls' advisor at North High School, Miss Essie Huery, decided, she was a Grinnell graduate, and she decided at that point that I should go to Grinnell. Well, that was a wonderful idea on her part. She drove me to Grinnell with my records and everything else and persuaded the people at Grinnell to give me a full scholarship and work program. So in other words, the academics were taken care of, but my livings, room and board, etc., I had to have all kinds of different works, jobs. And I had all kinds of different jobs. My 4 years at Grinnell were fabulous, absolutely fabulous. When I got there the first day, I thought I had landed in paradise because it was so bucolic and so academic. It was just great. I graduated in 1952, and I want to telescope those years because I want to get to Schindler's List, which is the important thing here. I don't know what's happening here. Is something on the screen or not? Okay, so I did some further studies after Grinnell. I went to Columbia University and got my master's in teaching, and met my husband, got married. I don't know what I'm doing here. I got married, I had 2 children, I taught on Long Island. No, this isn't right. For 27 years. And I tended to work with children who had learning difficulties because I could certainly understand their problems because I had had the same kind of problems. So we bonded very well together. I taught elementary, and then one day in 1982, I'm reading the New York Times. Excuse me, but the cold here is making my nose run. Sorry. I'm still shivering here. I'm reading the New York Times, and I'm opening to the Times book review section, and what do I see there? A book being reviewed called Schindler's List by Thomas Keneally. Well, I practically jumped out of my seat because there was my life in front of me in a book. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. Quickly, I called my mother and told her to be sure and run out and get the book herself, which she did. I read it. The community that I lived in, of course, didn't know anything about my experiences. We were not known. It was almost till 1967 that the word Holocaust became used in a regular language. Up to that point, we were called DPs, displaced persons, people who could not go after the war back to their own countries. And that's what people knew, that I came from Europe, but they also knew that I was a DP. Nobody knew that I had gone through the Holocaust. I never told any of my children about it. I was very, very private about it. My husband knew, and of course my parents knew, but otherwise nobody else knew. Nobody in school, nobody in the community. On reading the book, I discovered in the book that the name of Leon Page was mentioned often. We knew him, of course, in Europe and in camp as Leopold Pfefferberg. But apparently he was the one that gave Keneally the story. Schindler was very well recognized in Israel, as I said, because people there knew what he had done. But nobody on the outside knew the fact that what he did, He was absolutely not known in America. He was not known, not even in Europe, except maybe in Germany. But he was known so well in Israel that in Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem, there is a row of trees called the Alley of the Righteous Gentiles, where trees are planted in recognition of somebody's name who had helped during the war in any way at all. And his tree is in number 3 position from the very beginning. So he was recognized there very, very early, but not anyplace else. I don't know about the no. Whoops. All right, so that was the book. So in 1984, we my son was living in Los Angeles, and we came to visit him, and we knew Paul Page of Waldeck Pfefferberg, and we decided to go and visit him and find out from him what happened. How did Kennedy get this story? How did Schindler's List get published? And this is what he told us. Mr. Keneally was attending a lecture or a convention of some sort at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Mr. Waldeck Pfefferberg, or Mr. Page, had a leather goods store down the road in Beverly Hills. Mr. Keneally broke a handle on his portfolio, and the people at the hotel told him to go down to this particular leather goods store to have it fixed. He walked in. This is all from Paul Page telling us this story. He walked in, noticed that Mr. Page spoke with an accent, asked Mr. Page where he was from. Mr. Page told him, and then he asked Mr. Keneally, and what are you? And Mr. Keneally said, I'm a writer. To which Mr. Page said, have I got a story for you? And he had been collecting papers. Paul Page had been collecting papers and ideas all of these years. He finally got Keneally interested in it, and it took Keneally a whole year to go and visit different places to make sure that what Paul Page was telling him was the truth. Then he decided, okay, and he wrote the book. It was originally published in England under Schindler's Ark, but when it came to the United States, it was published under Schindler's List. Universal Studios took an option on it. Right away, they knew that this was an interesting story and they could do something with it. They were going to have Steven Spielberg do the film. But Steven Spielberg, at that point, now this is like 10 years, had just done E.T., and he was in no frame of mind to do a serious film like that. As a matter of fact, it took him 10 years before he decided he was savvy enough and maybe old enough to tackle when my son told me my son worked at the Universal at that point, and he told me one day that they were thinking of doing the film, and I said, how could you possibly do a film of Schindler's List? I mean, concentration camps and all of that, couldn't imagine. It took 10 years to the release of the movie. This is Paul Page and me in 1984 visiting him at his leather goods store. So just to make sure that I'm telling you the correct things. Okay, so now the movie is made in 1990. He starts making the movie in 1992. Goes to Poland, Spielberg, filming in Poland. People come to him while they're filming and telling him different stories of their survival, how they survive, whether in camps or whether in hidden in different people's homes, different kinds of stories. He becomes so impressed with it that he decides to gather all of these stories before the survivors all die or are no longer with us. He takes the $50 million that was his personal take from the film, and starts the Shoah Foundation. Shoah in Hebrew means genocide or Holocaust. So he decides to film or interview 56,000, ends up with 56,000 different survival stories in 30 different languages. Those stories are digitized, recorded, translated, and at this point they are actually, I did it again. Okay, let me just tell you a little bit about the Shoah Foundation. The 56,000 testimonies are on film, and what is so incredible about it is Steven Spielberg thought of just collecting the stories, but what he didn't realize is what an incredible impact these stories would have in terms of teaching and education. Because now you can go to, you can read about the Holocaust, you can go to a museum and see the artifacts, but nothing tells you, nothing connects with you as much as a human voice. And that is what these testimonies do. You click on somebody, like for example, you want to know what it was like to be 13 years old in a concentration camp. And by the way, my testimony is now all over, including the Free University of Berlin, and there it is translated into German. So somebody studying what it was like clicks on that, I appear, and then I tell in German to that person what it was like to be in Auschwitz. So there's nothing like it. So these testimonies are now used all over the world. I have a list here of various institutions of higher learning that have it, so students can really tune in and find out from first-person interview what it was like, and these are permanent. Nobody can say, this never happened, because it's there. Okay, let's see what I did now. I was told you about the Shoah Foundation archives. In the institution, I have a list of various institutions. The permanent home is at USC, which is the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And right now, they're continuing their deposition or testimonies about the Armenian genocide, the Rwanda, Cambodia, Guatemala, Nanjing massacre. Somebody was just there who experienced the Nanjing massacre by the Japanese and gave the testimony and was filmed. Very interesting. All right? Now, the Schindler's DVD. Steven Spielberg had no intention of redoing the movie or doing anything like that. But in 2003, on the 10th anniversary, there was so much talk and so much denial about Holocaust, particularly in the film community. I don't want to mention names, but in the film community, they said that certain people said that there was no such thing as the Holocaust, then nobody could have killed so many people at one time. So he decided that he was going to reissue Schindler's List, but on a DVD. But what he was going to do is on the back side of the DVD, have voices from the list. He picked a few of us in our testimonies, and they are recorded on the back of the DVD. In that sense, we are supporting exactly what happened. And once, if these things survive, that shows that the Holocaust did happen, because we are there and we are telling about it. I gotta be careful here. There are voices from the list, and they're on the back. And I was invited to the event of releasing the DVD, which was very interesting because I met with all the people who are in the film. Wonderful. Had a special talk with Steven Spielberg. And it was at that point that I really said to him, I never spoke about this thing. I knew that Schindler saved my life, but I never talked about, my experiences. It was only after Schindler's List came out that gave me a voice, because it gave me a point of reference in a way. I could say, well, if you have seen Schindler's List, then I can tell you about my part of the story. And so I often tell Steven Spielberg that Schindler gave me a life, but he gave me a voice. He's my second Schindler. There's no question about that. So, I'm almost there. This is the event. I'm meeting with Steven Spielberg. Now, how did I get on Schindler's List? Well, lots of people ask me that, okay? Schindler's personality. He was a man larger than life, practically. He was a gambler. There's a German expression calling somebody like that a Hochstapler. He was always lived on the edge of things. He loved things that were controversial. If he could fool some Germans and bribe them, that was what he wanted to do. He was a bon vivant. He loved good life, wine, women. His wife came to visit him in Krakow at the very beginning of the war, and then decided she didn't want what she saw, so she went back to Czechoslovakia. They never divorced because they were good Catholic, and but he was that kind of a happy-go-lucky guy. He receives the factory as the spoils of war. He was a very early supporter of Hitler. He was one of those people who was allowed to wear the blood order cross, It was kind of a huge swastika, really, that you wore. And he was one of the few early people, who wore one of those. So he gets the factory, and the factory is an enamel factory. But because he decides, he gets the contract from the German government to create mess kits for the army. So because he's doing something for the army, he is allowed to have camp laborers, which don't cost them anything because it's free labor. All he has to provide is food for them. So he makes money. He gets camp workers, but Schindler's factory becomes a safe haven because at one point we were in the ghetto, and at one point we walked from the ghetto to various factories, but then when the ghetto was liquidated, we were put into the concentration camp of Plaszow, and his workers, he complained to the commandant and said to the commandant, I'm losing too much of the work because the people have to walk from the camp into my factory, and my furnaces are going and everything, and this is no good. So he bribed the commandant, and the commandant allowed him to take some of his workers and build a barracks on top of the factory in Krakow, right in his factory. And so that became a very safe spot for the people because they no longer had to experience the bestiality of the incredible commandant of Plaszow concentration camp. But as the Russian army started advancing, they were now talking about 1944, towards about, September almost. We are told that the camp is going to be liquidated too, closed. So Schindler decides to move he has an epiphany, really. He decides to save his workers. I mean, he got very fond of them, and he decides to do a good deed. So he bribes the commandant and gets permission from the commandant to take 1,100 workers to a new factory in Czechoslovakia, which is going to be a munitions factory. So he makes up a list. He moves the factory to Brindlitz, Czechoslovakia, and the factory produces munitions, and I'll tell you more about it. He takes 1,100 workers, 800 men, and 300 women, and he makes up a list. How I got on the list. My parents were accountants before the war and during the war. My father in particular had an account with a company that produced, it was a sewing factory that produced shirts. It was a Jewish factory, which was taken over by the Germans and given to a guy named Madrich, who was from Vienna. I don't know why he got the factory, but he did. And he was a very decent human being. As a matter of fact, he's also recognized by the Yad Vashem for saving his workers. When he took over the sewing factory, he also got a contract with the German government for making uniforms rather than shirts. Those heavy uniforms for the German army. He was able then, because it was a necessary war effort, he was able to get ghetto and camp workers to come and work for him for nothing. But he did provide food. Ooh, did it again, darn it. Madrich is a thoroughly decent person. And he is, as a matter of fact, when in the camp, when the ghetto was closed and the factories had to be moved, I told you Schindler was able to get some of his workers to his own company and build barracks on top of it. Madrich could not do that because he had no excuse. He didn't have furnaces, he only had sewing machines, and the sewing machines could be moved. So his factory was moved into the Plaszow concentration camp in a separate area with barbed wire, and we then lived in other barracks and walked to the factory during the morning. And when Madrich moved the factory to the concentration camp, what happened was really very nice of him. He delivered huge trucks filled with these huge bales of heavy woolen material, like loden, very heavy stuff, giant bolts of fabric. So under the fabric, he was able to bring in extra bread, medications, and all kinds of things to help his workers. So he was really a good person too. But he decides he's had enough of all of this and all of war and everything, and he decides to go back to Vienna and forego joining Schindler with another factory in Czechoslovakia. So Madrich decides not to move the factory, and so Schindler, they were very good friends. And so Schindler says to him, okay, then give me some of your people that worked well for you to put on the list. And Madrich puts about, I would say, between 60 and 100 of his workers onto Schindler's list. And that is how I got on the list. So, I don't know whether it's chance, luck, or fate, but that's how I survived. Now I have some pictures now to show you. I was in Schindler factory in 2006, I took my family to Krakow to show them all of, the background, etc. And this is the original entrance to the Schindler factory in Krakow. Now, on each side, I don't know whether you can see that, but on each side there is a plaque in the window. And the plaques say the following things. Picture of Oskar Schindler was part of his story, original, in Poland. And on the other side is a memorial plaque that says, you save one person, save the world entire. I was able to sit at his desk in the old factory, which was kind of interesting. Now, that old factory has been redone into a museum. And now, the Oskar Schindler Enamel Factory is now a host to a branch of the Historical Museum of the City of Krakow in the administrative building of the former enamel factory known as Oskar Schindler's Deutsche Emalienfabrik. And I have, let's see now, where is it? Right there. There is there is a guide that they give you when you go to that new museum that tells about the whole history of what happened to Krakow during the war and talks about the Schindler factory, etc. Now, inside the Schindler factory, inside the museum, there's a huge wall in gold, and on that wall are all the names of all the people that were on Schindler's List. And I don't know whether my name shows up, but we were kind of in the middle there, my parents and myself. Okay, the next picture you see is now on the outside of the entrance to this museum. You see some of the pictures of the survivors that are, that they were able to get a picture at that stage, that some of the survivors were older and died, But this is kind of interesting to see the actual pictures. I am there, and my parents are there too. And it's become such an incredible visiting place that Krakow golf cart tours to Schindler's factory. To Schindler's factory to see the Jewish ghetto. And during the summer, they have now every year an incredible festival that of about 10,000 people attend. So there are no Jews living, but Jews come to see it. So that's kind of interesting too. Now, this is my Mater Leontine, and that's me saying goodbye to her. Usually you don't get a picture, but Mother Superior knew that I was leaving that day and allowed my teacher to have a picture taken with me. And I treasure that. And over there you can see a close-up of the picture and the letters that she wrote to me for the next 2 years while I was in the United States. Wait, what am I doing? Okay, this is a letter from Steven Spielberg. You can read it here. It's on the table. And I don't know what happened to the cup. Well, the cup is here. But I have no idea what happened to the cup. But anyway, thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm still freezing. And I do invite you to come and take a look at some of the articles here. In 2015, the Shoah Foundation sent me to Auschwitz as part of the celebration, or I shouldn't say celebration, part of the activities for commemoration of the fact that Auschwitz was liberated 70 years before, on the 17th of January. And 10 years ago, they had like 1,500 survivors still. This time, they only had 100 of us. And so they decided that this was going to be the last commemoration because they don't think there will be, in 10 more years, there will be anybody left. But while we were there, we were given, and I think you can see it's in kind of a leather box there, kind of a medallion that shows the entrance to the Auschwitz and the railroad tracks going in through the entrance. And it was a very interesting experience. To tell you a little bit about my own take on it, because everybody's asked me, how did you feel to go back to Auschwitz after all that time? And it was almost like an out-of-body experience. I knew I was there, but something triggered in me, and I was looking at it from the point of view of the 13-year-old girl who was going through Auschwitz at the time. So, interesting experience. All right, take any questions you have. Yeah? But I don't know that I can hear you. Okay, do we have a mic? Oh. Well, this is what happened. As I told you at the end, he made a list, and there were 800 men and 300 women. One day, towards this was like end of September, beginning of October, the 800 men were put on boxcars and left, and we had no idea whether they made it into Czechoslovakia or not. They were just gone. 2 weeks later, the 300 women were put on boxcars, and we left. We were going about a day and a half. It was dark in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden the train stopped, and we thought we were in Czechoslovakia, because after all, it's not that far. The doors were open, and all of a sudden we kept hearing all these awful noises and barking of dogs and skylight illuminated by plumes of fire and horrible smell. And we found ourselves in Auschwitz, not knowing at all why we were there or what happened. We stayed in Auschwitz, right away they told us to get off the train, line up in rows as always, and they walked us into a barrack called the sauna, and sauna in German means bath. They told us to strip, and we did. We were all naked. Then the women barbers started to cut our hair, and some of them, if they didn't like you, they shaved you. If they liked you, they cut it just bits and pieces. And then we were walked into a shower. Door was closed. we all looked up, and there were the shower heads. And of course, we did not know what would come, whether water or gas. So it was a very panicky and incredible moment till the water came out, and we felt like we'd been saved again for at least another day. So we were not gassed at that point. We walked out of the showers. Next door, given different kind of clothes, whatever we had on us was left behind in the other room. We were given different kind of clothes and wooden shoes and walked out into the cold and into the barrack. The 300 women were divided into 3 barracks, which was 100, 100, 100. And that's where we stayed. And we stayed in Auschwitz for between 5.5 to 6 weeks. And our chores were every morning we stood on being counted for about 2 hours. Every lunch we were counted for about 2 hours. And every evening we were counted for about 2 hours in groups of 5. And it was cold. The snow was already on the ground. Our jobs were to clean the barracks, to clean the latrine, to be taken, to do odd jobs that they found for us, like shoveling snow, etc., or going to the kitchen compound and shelling potatoes. And one day, my mother volunteered to go and shell potatoes, skin the potatoes, hoping that she could possibly pick up a few of the peels and bring them back to eat. And it was on that day, when my mother was gone in a group of 30 women, that barrack was taken for selection, which occurred very often. We were taken into another barrack, told to strip, stand in a row naked. In front of us was Dr. Mengele, and had a pencil in his hand, and with that pencil he would point to either left or right. Left meant that you weren't so good. Right meant that you may live for another day. And I happened to be in front of him at one time. I got left to that group, which was not a good idea, But when he got finished with all the women, he beckoned the group on the left to come through again. And at that point, I was, I don't know what made me, I was tall, I was skinny, underdeveloped, I was only 13, but my body was nice and clean. And so when I finally stood in front of him, something in me said to him, "Lassen Sie mich," which is 3 words in German that say, "Let me go." And this time, the pencil went to the right. And I ran past him, picked up my clothes, and ran out into the snow outside, hysterically crying, because all of a sudden, I've gotten a reprieve on life by Dr. Mengele. Now, I often thought in later years, when I, was a little older and I could rationalize things, etc., I often wondered what would I have done if my mother were there? Would I have depended upon my mother to save me? Or what? It has taught me something. It has taught me that you can never walk in another person's shoes, and you can never predict how you would act in any particular circumstances because you really don't know. And it has made me feel less judgmental as to what people do. So that was my experience in Auschwitz. But let me tell you that finally, after 5.5 to almost 6 weeks, we are led as a whole group to be tattooed. And at that point, we feel that, okay, we're probably going to have to stay in Auschwitz. Now, all of a sudden, the whole group is veered to another point, put on into the boxcars, and we see Schindler standing there. He had come in by himself with a huge valise of money that he bribed the commandant of Auschwitz to release his women. And I think that's what the commandant was probably waiting for him to finally come and bribe him. So that's how we were saved, because Schindler came on his own and took his 300 women to Czechoslovakia. And about a day and a half after that, they opened the doors and we got out. And behind the barbed wire, we see the 800 men standing, and that was the first time that we knew that they had made it and they had arrived there and it was okay. And they, of course, don't recognize us at all because we look so different with our shorn hair, etc. And it's also at that point that Schindler, once we make it into the factory, Schindler tells us that nothing from that factory is ever going to leave that is going to be of any use to the Germans. These were making munitions for the V-2s, the rockets that were shelling the London people. It was done in such a way that just a millimeter wrong, and the calibrators that we were using to measure things under the supervision of the German soldiers were set up in such a way that they showed that the parts that we were measuring were correct. But nothing ever left from that factory of any use. Oh, that's good.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
You're welcome.
Oh, so cold.
Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Sandler, and I too am a co-president of the Iowa Jewish Historical Society. It has been a really rare privilege to hear Celina share her story this afternoon. I want to thank you for sharing this experience with us, and I again want to thank our donors who made this possible. In times like today, as in the past, it is critical that we listen to each other and we learn from the atrocities of the past. Celina's story is part of the world's history, and it is part of the history of everyone in this audience. Her story connects us all to national and international events that have shaped and will continue to shape Iowa's and this country's future. It also, understanding history and learning from it, lays the groundwork for building strong, resilient communities and an understanding and appreciation of all of us. And thank you so much, all of you, and Celina especially, for coming today. And we invite you to visit us in the museum in the near future. And again, thank you for listening.
You are welcome to come up here and look at the display.
You did a wonderful